I always forget.
Okay, so we're here with Mary Cerulli of the Climate Finance section, and she's ready to present to the Climate and Health team.
Great. And I am going to share my slides, and hopefully we can get this right this time. Oh, I got the wrong thing up. Let's get this up. And let's do it this way. Nope, let's do it this way. Does that look right? No, I know what I'm doing wrong. One more thing. Sorry. Okay. How's that?
That's still your email.
Oh, it is? Okay, hang on. Don't want I had you can tell I had your bio up. Let me see. Sorry about that, you guys. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I have to share screen and I have to hit this one. And then I do this. How am I doing now? Is that the right one?
Yes, looks good.
Okay.
Perfecto. Okay, so that's the title of our presentation today, Greening Retirement Savings Plans. Okay, let's go right to it.
Okay.
The next slide shows, we'll talk about, just very quickly about climate finance action and its mission. So we believe that retirement plans can leverage their outsized customer power to demand action from big investors that manage employees' savings. We formed a corporation in May 2020, but I've been doing this kind of work for a long time. And in 2019, we began this work with the former New York City Comptroller, Scott Stringer, when we were looking at the 20 largest utilities in North America and how they really needed to decarbonize. So this sent us on our way. And what does the finance industry need to do? What does our financial system need to do? The next slide you'll see. It's pretty straightforward. We need to shift capital to green energy and to new low carbon technologies. And we need to pressure the banks and insurers and consumer goods companies that are causing deforestation and other high emitting companies to move those business models to a low carbon economy. Is it possible? Yes. What's holding us back? A lot of it's political will. And this group probably knows that better than anybody. Mm-hmm. The next slide, it's pretty busy, but let's just spend a moment. Can everyone see that? Yes. And we can share these slides later, but let's just spend a moment on the beginnings of sustainable investing. It's really looking at material risk. And so back in the 60s, folks were thinking about material risk, and it has moved through the past couple of decades to where we are now, which is, if you look at the numbers, global assets in sustainable funds are on track to exceed 53 trillion by 2025. So, I mean, it's not a made up thing. There's a lot of rules and regulations now, and reporting requirements for companies so that investors can ascertain whether or not they are truly pursuing a sustainable business model. But right now, and this is where we'll get into some talk about legislation, the next slide you'll see the pushback across our country. Politicians are attacking mainstream sustainable investment practices. And really, this is all about analyzing and responding to environmental, social, and corporate governance risk. And they're labeling it as woke capitalism. Their goal is to really make sustainable investing a culture war issue. So politicians that are serving fossil fuel donors, they want to force financial institutions to abandon even the most basic climate risk mitigation. And then there's the dark money groups that are funding attacks that they've been doing this for decades, that have been protecting fossil fuel interest and really stripping workers of their rights and livelihoods. And so this attack in ESG gives them a platform to do just both of those things. And we've seen some more centrist and business voices that have called this out, and to tell you the truth, they're quite alarmed by the anti-free market, which is typically pretty bad for business. So, and then on that left-hand side, we've chosen just a few of those entities that are really driving this pushback. And you might notice ALEC, the Consumers Research. There's a really great nonprofit we work with called Documented that has, and I'll provide this link. Oh, maybe I can do, yeah, I'll provide this link at the end in case you want to look at the history of this particular pushback. And there's about 30 organizations that are involved in it. They're kind of like, they're like ALEC. It's quite complicated, but and just to bring this home a little bit, we've seen this kind of pushback before, and it goes back to the end of the Civil War, when President Johnson vetoed civil rights, saying it was a reverse discrimination against white people. And we saw it during the civil rights movement, when many white people said equality, being forced to serve you violates my civil rights. And so the whole idea that anti-racism is anti-white is really an old playbook. But now we see, with this concerted effort, it's moved to the center of a Republican Party, and on the heels of this so-called critical race theory. So yeah, it's powerful. But what we have on the next slide is a little bit of good news. On the opposite, oh no, not good news. I just wanted to, sorry, I skipped this slide in my mind anyway. So as of the beginning of March, we see that there's been 136 bills in 32 states. 47 of those bills limit our public state pension funds. And then there's been 6 laws actually passed. And so this text down here goes into what those bills look like, and how they are limiting those big pension plans' power to engage on climate and diversity proposals at companies. And as I mentioned before, these prominent conservative politicians and groups are really using this to energize their base. Yeah, 136 bills. I never thought it would be that much. So the next slide is a little bit of better news, and it does have a complexity to it, and this is all around our defined contribution plans, or the retirement savings plans that are offered by employers. And that too has had several decades of back and forth. And so just to get everyone on the same page, ERISA governs those private companies rather than our public pension plans. And it's a federal law that sets minimum standards for our retirement savings plan and some health plans in the private industry. And it's really there to protect individuals that are saving for retirement. And this slide is supposed to show that there's a ping pong thing going on here too, because there's back and forth. What should these retirement plans do, and who should they listen to? So most recently, there was in 2015, the rule was updated to say that there's this tiebreaker. And so the tiebreaker really refers to if there's two investments that are pretty indistinguishable, the one that incorporates climate risk, social risk, and governance risk, like perhaps the CEO should not be the chair of the board. Good governance said they should be, those two roles should not be within one person. So then in 2022, with our then Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, I have to mention him because he was the Boston mayor for quite some time. And he has a very heavy Boston accent. So whenever I heard him talk, I was just it warmed my heart. But anyway, this 2023 Department of Labor law, rule, embraced a very principle-based approach to sustainable investing. And we know that Biden had to exert his veto power to keep it on the books. But I just want to let you know that polling, all sorts of data shows that most Americans want their retirement, the folks that are investing for them to have freedom to consider sustainable investing and freedom to take into these material risks. And it's shown that you do not have to sacrifice returns to take in material risks. That's kind of what good investors do. And so this rule does not force or does not require or in any way overweights environmental, social, or governance factors. The rule also followed a super robust public consultation process. And the Department of Labor received more than 20,000 public comments. 97% of them supported the proposal. So all our friends in the House that got all rallied up to scratch this rule, we're really going back to some of those kind of anti-ESG woke capitalism fallbacks. And I was proud of our president that he exerted that power. So now we'll get into what the heck is climate safe investing. The next slide, let's just talk a little bit about climate safe investing. And so there's all sorts of acronyms, but basically our International Sustainability Standards Board has provided a definition of sustainability: the ability for a company to sustainably maintain resources and relationships to manage all of its impacts with the whole business ecosystem over the short, medium, and long term. Pretty straightforward. So with this, we know that investors can exert pressure on high-emitting companies to make good on their commitments on several issues, not only their net zero climate commitments, but their commitments for racial equity, for worker safety, and to really look at a business strategy to fully align with the goals of Paris and for reaching net zero by 2050 or sooner. So we call this ability to exert pressure on those companies that they own shares in. We call this shareholder power. It's super important because these investors have a seat at the table. And if they're not using the tools that they have to pressure these companies across all different sectors, we're like business as usual. What's up? Why aren't you using? We need every hand on deck. And so climate safe investing is having an asset manager or an investor investing on your behalf with your retirement savings to hold these companies accountable. The next slide just kind of brings that home. So employer-sponsored defined contribution plans, we know that your institution selects and approves your investment options. As employees, you're contributing savings to those investment options. But those investment options are not always taking climate risk into account. So actually, your savings is at risk, at financial risk to your retirement savings. And so what we want to do here is look at who is really controlling how those savings are being invested and how they're being used to demand more from high emitting companies. And so the next slide, we'll just take a moment to look at another picture where on the left you have individuals contributing to their retirement savings, and they're choosing those investment options. But those investment options are controlled by these asset managers, and you might have heard of them. Fidelity, Vanguard, BlackRock is one of the largest, is the largest investor in the world. And others, T. Rowe Price, there's a lot of different asset managers. And then they invest the money, and then they provide returns in exchange for a fee to the people. There's just one big problem with these asset managers, which we'll show on the next slide. Oh no, yeah, I have one more kind of, I have one more. Before we get to the asset managers, we need to talk about target date funds. Target date funds are a wonderful product that are in most retirement savings plans. They really are designed so that you can contribute to your retirement, and then that product that you save money into changes as you get closer to retirement. So that's why we have 2030, 2040, 2050, and on out. And so as you near retirement, these products get more conservative because we're anticipating that you're starting to draw down that retirement. So also what's really great about these products is that they offer exposure across different sectors. So you have like a lot of balls in play here, or a basket of different types of investments, so you're not exposed to one certain risk. And these are chosen by your employer. And here's the key: they're used as a default option. So when someone starts to work and they are able to contribute to their retirement savings plan, if they don't pick anything, they go into this safe harbor, this safe product. And inevitably, 2/3 of a company's retirement savings are directed to these target date funds. So now we'll talk about the folks that are managing these target date funds on the next slide. Oh, I always get ahead of myself. I'm so sorry. Boy, you guys are going to be ready to hear about these asset managers. Yeah, sorry. We took a look at some data, and our partners put this together at the Certified Planner CPA, Certified Planner Analyst, Certified Accountant. I'm sorry, it's late here. I forget the acronym. Anyway, what's interesting, especially in the healthcare field, is that because of what healthcare is, really 97% of those emissions can be contributed to scope 3, as opposed to, let's say, that pie on the bottom in the middle, where materials, a lot of that emissions are attributed to like their actual operations. But scope 3 emissions, it really include your retirement savings plan. And you can see for health services professionals where the big lever is in the retirement assets. So the carbon intensity of 401k, or those are really, you know, a fancy word for retirement savings plans in the private sector. Your retirement savings is really driving those emissions. So what are we going to do to bring those down with all the sustainability efforts that are going on, especially in hospitals these days? How are we going to tackle this retirement savings plan? And I really hope the next slide is about asset managers. Lisa, can you turn? Yes. Okay, these asset managers, they provide those target date funds, and guess what? They are huge. They have so much power. Look at just those four. Have nearly 26 trillion under management. That means that when you look at like the largest companies that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, that these investors often together own up to 15 or 20% of those companies. And so if you think about the high emitting companies, we know that about 100 of them are causing the lion's share of our problems when it comes to emissions. And so if these folks have so much power over those companies, we have got to get them off the bench, especially that they enjoy these flows into these target date funds that I told you about. Just to bring this home a little bit, on the next slide, we'll see that they have several big problems, all of them a little bit different, but I mentioned their influence is extreme. They don't have policies for equity, human rights abuses, you know, with the deforestation happening mostly in the Amazon and in places that we don't see, but even Procter & Gamble cuts down like boreal forest for its toilet paper. Really? Now, these big investors can force these companies to do better. And especially on the climate lobbying and political spending that some of these high emitting companies are engaging in. And really, all these asset managers, and I think I've said this a couple times, they have failed to use their power. And that's really, really, really frustrating. But we're making some inroads. And so what can folks do in terms of engaging decision makers in their own firms to pressure these asset managers to do better. The next slide. We have identified several key actions. The first one is to engage and educate others. And the second is to identify who are the decision makers at that company and understand where those levers are and who's making those decisions, and get some folks, get some influencers on your team. And then depending on what that retirement plan looks like, we can help shape the best ask for your company. I'm going to tell you a little story on the next slide, which we were lucky enough to have some of the doctors from Mass General Brigham, but and they tell it so much better than I do. But we've been working with them, I think, for at least 18 months. So half of it is kind of keeping up the strength. But what really bothered these climate activists was starting to understand this big lever, and how Mass General Brigham was not even considering their own investments, but also that they were upset that their savings was going into private prisons, companies that had terrible worker safety records, as well as fossil fuel companies and dirty utilities. So they really came down hard on climate risk is public health risk. And we worked with them to bring more and more folks together. Their climate group, they called Climate Code Blue. And they were able to get in front of, like, they call them the POs, or the physician officers, to tell them this story about how their asset managers could do better and they weren't. And so over the course of a year, in pretty quick succession, they were able to meet with their human resources and benefits people who totally got this. And then they had to go through their Sustainable Leadership Council, which was a combination of Brigham as well as Mass General. So that got many meetings with them. But we're on our 4th meeting with the CFO, so the chief financial officers. And so what we do is to provide research and data, so there can always be a really good follow-up. And they got a little, like, tiny piece of bread with 2 little options added, but the real ask is to provide a customized target date fund or a qualified default investment account that really matches that institution's mission and their values. And, these leaders at these organizations, I mean, we know that there's hardly any courage in Washington, but we find that these leaders at these big hospital systems are almost just as bad. But we're going to try to, I don't know, hold their hand, give them a cookie. I don't know what else to say, but with more and more folks understanding this, we hope that there'll be some movement, and at least have some of these leaders get on their bully pulpits and call out these asset managers to do better. Done. That wasn't too bad, right? Half hour?
Yeah. That was awesome. That's great.
Nice job. I think there'll be a lot of questions, but Mary, talk about, besides working with the Harvard people, some of the other like what I read about in Colorado that you had been working with right after you presented to the pediatricians. Tell us about some of the other groups you have worked with.
Sure. So the retirement like the retirement savings ecosystem is large and complex. And so we work in coalition with a lot of union leaders and state treasurers' offices and their investment staff on the public pension plan side. So those are our state pension plans that are really the only retirement vehicle for our state workers, sanitation people, public school teachers, union folks, pretty much all of our essential workers. And those pension plans have been attacked ever since Reagan really attacked. And so in Colorado, we're working with that state treasurer's office, but also the coalition of union folks in Colorado. And we help them understand their pension plan, kind of it's so complex there, but to start to really understand some of these concepts, to put pressure on that board of trustees that runs that Colorado, they call it Colorado Para. But there also was a bill that Senator Hansen from Colorado proposed that really looked at climate risk and how do this public pension fund, how can it align with the state's net zero goals and clean energy goals without, and this is all without harming those workers' retirement plans. So it's a little bit different than just calling out to divest from fossil fuels. It's really a much more umbrella and nuanced approach. We do this in several states and always are thinking about the worker first. Always the worker first. What are they working on? Responsible contracts, worker safety, but a lot of it comes down to climate risk. So yeah, that's just one state example.
Yvonne, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. Great talk. I missed the beginning, so looking forward to the recording. Do you have a list that you could provide? I know you had a few on your slide of account managers that are doing bad things, but do you have a sense of a list of even getting more specific of companies in general outside of financial companies that are doing really well in the ESG space versus those that are not, that you've already compiled?
Yes, I think I understand what you're asking. Is that, are there companies, not necessarily investors, but are there specific companies that are really taking sustainability seriously and doing something, something about it, right?
Correct, like the A list and then the F list.
Right. Yes. I can definitely, yeah, we don't compile that, but our partners do. And how should we do these follow-ups, Lori and Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, you just send it to us and we'll send it out and we'll put a blog in our forum on it also.
Okay, great. Do you think okay, so I'm just gonna write these questions down, or what like my response will be that I can send you, and maybe we can make sure that I get all of them right between the three of us, right?
Yeah, or if you want to put a link or something in the chat now, that's even better as far as I'm concerned. I just don't know if you have it available right now.
Hard for her. Might be a little hard for her answering questions at the time.
Okay.
And then I think Joanne's next.
Hi, Mary, thank you so much for your presentation, and I really appreciate your story, especially about Brigham and Mass General. For those on the call, I've had the retirement assets that I have in my own personal control, I've had invested in fossil-free funds for about 8 or 9 years, and they have matched or outperformed the market for the most part. But I approached my employer some years ago about just offering in their portfolio of offering sustainable responsible investing. And even though they're a nonprofit that's supposed to be a community benefit corporation is a federally qualified health center. They looked at me as if I was from Mars, and I just didn't have I ran out of energy and I didn't pursue it. But if I get some allies and another opportunity, what I would love would be a very simple couple of slides or one-page handout that just kind of presents the case for a CMO or CFO. I'm wondering if you have anything like that.
We sure do, Joanne. And maybe I can share my email address and we can do a little bit of research on your company and then really tailor it. Because that would be awesome. I would love to help you with that.
Thank you. That sounds great.
I think Bob Wilson was Bob Kitchen was next. And then can I put your email in the chat for everybody? Mary? Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, that's been a very interesting talk, and I'll have to say that about a year ago, I retired from Kaiser Permanente, and we had a physician on the West Coast who's been very active in just climate change issues, and she was trying to get the Permanente Federation, which oversees the retirement fund, to take up divestment. And I think she got kind of frustrated in terms of a lack of response on their part. So I found this very interesting. I need to touch base with her. If I go to your website, will that identify different organizations that you might be working with to help them for divestment?
We are not divest campaigners. So there's a lot of folks that are divest campaigners, but what I tried to emphasize is that we look at the whole portfolio, and believe in a shift of capital. There needs to be a shift of capital away from fossil fuel companies that are not changing. But that has to be done in a way that does not harm the employee. And when there's a very binary call to divest, that puts the investment professionals on the super defense. And what I tried to get across is that there is something to be said for shareholder power, and the ability to be at the table. When one divests from public equities, those shares, that company doesn't go away. That company hardly feels it because those shares are inevitably bought by someone else. And so the not to get down into the weeds, but to deny debt, to deny capital in the form of fixed income or a loan, that's when you're going to get some movement here. There's all sorts of new products on the market, sustainably linked bonds, green bonds, also on the private markets. But Kaiser Permanente is part of a group of 20 hospital systems that have made a climate pledge that we're working with Healthcare Without Harm. And if they heard something like this, not a call to divest, but something like this, they would start to really, just like MGB, they would start to feel like maybe they could do something because it's in their best interest to mitigate climate risk. But it's a very different tool than divestment.
Okay.
So I would love to talk to you about Kaiser Permanente. There's a whole bunch of folks that are understanding some of this more nuanced approach to get them to change. They also have a huge union component. All the folks that are working in those hospitals that aren't the professional class, they're all unionized. So they're all SEIU union folks. that we work closely with.
Okay, I'll look into it a little more and get in touch with the physician in California and get back to you if it looks like there's an opportunity. Thank you.
Cool. Lisa?
Yeah, great talk, really interesting. And thank you. I love this non-binary framing and the idea of shifting capital rather than divesting. In general, I just like approaching things in more nuance and less binary. My question to you is, you're talking about the fact that okay, I'm really stupid about finance, so forgive me, but I'm sure if you've worked with Healthcare Without Harm and you've talked about climate pledges, you know that the Biden administration has pushed out through Health and Human Services this what's now a volunteer climate pledge to decarbonize healthcare. And you mentioned scope 3 emissions and the fact that a big part of scope 3 emissions is in fact their investments. So is it the investments of the hospital or the hospital employees, or what is captured in that scope 3? And is this part of the discussion? We've heard over and over again how hard it is to remove the scope 3 emissions, that's going to be the most challenging. Can we talk about this in the process of helping them fulfill their climate pledge? If they shift their capital, would it help them, lower their scope 3 emissions and therefore get closer to the pledge to decarbonize and decrease their scope 3 emissions?
Right. So I mean, I think I understand, but I don't know if I have the full answer. But a hospital system, their scope 3 emissions include like their medicines, their gloves, their buildings, right?
What they're purchasing.
The fact that, right, procurement, right? So all of those things that's what the Sustainable Leadership Council at MGB was doing. They were actually quantifying their carbon footprint. But if you include the retirement assets, that jacks that scope 3 up like crazy. And once MGB CFO said, "Oh yeah, we got to include those," and once that Sustainability Leadership Council understood, those scope 3 emissions are really dwarfed by those like investments. So I think that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah. So scope 3 does not typically, when most hospital systems are thinking about it and they're talking about scope 3 emissions, that's what I've always heard it said, it's supply chain. So they typically are not counting investments in that. Is that correct? Okay. That's helpful. Okay. Thank you.
Correct. But also, if you want to go down into the weeds, I have a paper, and it's not very long, but it's by Dr. Ash Segal from the Cleveland hospital system. And he actually quantified it. He's a wonderful man too. I can send you that. It's not long. It's like 5 pages, and you can kind of like you don't have to be a finance whiz to understand it because he lays it out pretty well. Do you want me to?
Nice.
I'll write that down.
Sure. That would be great. Thank you, Mary.
Deirdre?
Thank you very much for this presentation. I am a lawyer, not a doctor, so I found it particularly interesting. We at our CCL chapter have been trying to build a bridge to our local hospital system. And finally, after several years, we have been able to make a connection and develop a very good relationship with the medical executive committee and the new chief of staff. at the hospital. And I recently raised this exact subject, did the doctors know what the investment, where their pension funds or their 401k funds were invested? Did they have green investment choices in their 401ks? And I realized that they know very, very, very little about any of this. And I'm wondering if you have any basic materials, not for the CFO, not for the CEO, not for the human resources people who are familiar with all of this kind of thing, but for the doctors and the nurses who are part of these plans. Because until we can get them to understand, it's going to be hard to know, even for them to even know what questions to ask. I have two more questions. Can I give them to you and you can answer them in series? I recently listened to a podcast with the head of the Carbon Collective, whose name I think is Zach Stein. And he was talking about investment choices, particularly fund choices. And he said that you have to look really, really carefully at funds, because a fund that claims to use an ESG filter may not, in fact, be a fund that does not invest in fossil fuel related investments, because their filter takes into account both the governance and the social issues, as well as environmental issues. And I'm wondering about how you clearly identify funds that are purely green funds. And then my last question is, I know you were talking about BlackRock, and we all suspect BlackRock of greenwashing all the time. But Larry Fink went out front with a letter to his investors a couple of years ago that got a lot of play, in which he talked about fiduciary responsibility having to involve taking climate risk into account. So I'm wondering, is your view that BlackRock is just greenwashing? And trying to grab another market with one hand while investing in the harmful market with the other?
I just put the article from the New York Times in the chat there. How
Thank
about
you.
that?
Yeah, BlackRock has a lot of problems. But in 2020, Larry Fink's letter was one of the first ones that said climate risk, is fiduciary risk.
Yeah.
And so, he likes to be out front. And so he's gotten a lot of pushback, and certainly has caved to some of our more conservative states with the threat of divesting from BlackRock. So is BlackRock too big? Should it be regulated? Should it be considered a significantly important financial institution? Probably. That's some of the problems here. I don't know, I have mixed emotions, because they were out front and they did bring this to a really high level and challenged their competitors. And yes, did they use the ESG label as greenwashing? Vanguard did too. They all did. And almost like shame on us for not having a clear definition, because it was loophole city, right? But do they have some products that are really sustainable? Sure. They have some really good ETFs. They have some really good, decent product, but at the same time, they want their cake and eat it too.
Catherine's been extremely patient. So we have 4 minutes left. Let's.
Okay, and I'll make this real quick. I've just been clicking through your website looking for something that says, here's what shareholders can do. I'm a retiree from a medical center. I can't find, if you can direct me where to go, or I can just email you and you could send me the link, that would help because I've checked every tab I can find. I don't see anything that says, here's what you as a volunteer or here's what you as a concerned shareholder can do to help make happen what your group, what your organization is trying to make happen.
So do you mean as an individual investor, Catherine, or do you
Correct.
mean as an individual investor?
Yes,
Oh,
with a pension through a medical center with stuff in Fidelity and Vanguard.
oh, so if you, why don't we email exchange? Because it's not, one problem is it's not one fits all. It's very different from each medical center to each medical center. But I would be more than happy to kind of have a dialogue with you via email, or, you know, if you want to talk on the phone. So do you have,
Okay.
can you see my email address? I think it's
Yeah,
in the
I just copied it out of the chat and I'm finding a good place, probably the calendar reminder for this to paste that in. And so it sounds like ultimately what you're saying is that I need to talk to my former employer, to the medical center. Right? That's going to be the first place. I need to talk to the medical center. I need to go to somebody that's responsible for the 401k for the medical center I'm retired from.
But we might know some folks that are already doing work
I see.
At your medical center. So
I see. Okay.
yeah, so
I'll email.
Let's do a little email exchange.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I know it's near the end of the hour, but Robin, with all your work that you've done, UCSF, is anybody looking at their pension funds or just at divestment of their big pocket?
I think it's been looked at, I think it's being looked at in the whole UC system-wide, not specifically at UCSF. I think it's a system-wide. There are more campuses than just UCSF. There are activists involved from San Francisco PSR who are very involved in divestment issues, but I'm not sure if it is specifically with the UC system.
The UC system has really made quite a few strides in this regard.
Well, that's good to hear.
We're
our states that aren't.
We're a very big state and a big retirement plan and a big institution. And that's,
and you know what? It sure is. And I want to give a shout out, even though no one's from Pennsylvania here. We're Lori, we're working pretty closely with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Mm-hmm. And so great group of folks. But yeah, I'm glad you put that in, that we're totally willing to meet with y'all individually and see what we can do to you know, to move at your own pace and provide you with any kind of support that you might need.
Well, this is great, and I really appreciate your time twice now, Mary, and your knowledge. We're all pretty unknowledgeable about it. So yeah, we'll plan on seeing everybody next month. We'll send out Mary's slides and whatever other stuff she sends us. But really consult her one-on-one.
Really wonderful, Mary. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
I just wanted,
what a great group.
I wanted to
thank you so much.
I wanted to thank you for a great presentation, but also for your extraordinary generosity.
Yes.
And your willingness to meet with individuals around the specifics of their institutions.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.